Hello there, and thanks for joining us. This is NTD Business, and I'm Paul Graney. Social media giants are under fire for blocking stories about Joe Biden's son. Senate Judiciary will now vote to subpoena Twitter's CEO. The EU releases a new report on a digital euro. One commentator says it would be a big nail in the coffin of European banks. The United States sees a surge in new business filings. One economics professor says it's the highest on record. And there's a new framework on preserving U.S. tech dominance. There are internal threats and external threats. We have the details. Big election news of the day. Senators are accusing Twitter of censorship after it blocked a New York Post report on Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. Two reports, actually. The Senate will now vote this week to subpoena Twitter's CEO, Jack Dorsey. The Senate Judiciary Committee says Twitter's behavior could be election interference. Senator Ted Cruz accused Dorsey and Twitter of abusing their corporate power, and blocked articles appear to detail Hunter Biden's lucrative dealings with a Chinese energy company and with a Ukrainian businessman. Yesterday, Twitter stopped users tweeting a link to the article. They said they wanted to fact-check it first. Dorsey then tweeted an apology for the way Twitter handled the matter, but didn't take any action to unblock the links. Twitter does have rules that prohibit the sharing of hacked information, but many are asking why didn't it take similar action when President Trump's supposed tax returns were published by the New York Times? Conservatives, of course, have long argued that big tech companies like Twitter, Google, and Facebook have censored their viewpoints. Senator Lindsey Graham says this report crystallizes the problem. Of course, President Trump not so happy about the incident. Here's what he had to say.
President Trump told Fox News that Twitter and Facebook are acting like a branch of the Democratic Party, and that's not fair.
And it's like a third arm, maybe a first arm, of the DNC. Twitter and Facebook, really, it's a massive campaign contribution.
The New York Post story and Focus talked about an alleged email. It says Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, introduced his father to a Ukrainian businessman. At that time, Joe Biden was serving as vice president. Joe Biden has previously said he never spoke to his son about his overseas business dealings. The Biden campaign responded by saying, quote, he carried out official U.S. policy toward Ukraine and engaged in no wrongdoing. Twitter and Facebook both took action on Wednesday to stop people from spreading the story. Facebook says it has limited the story's distribution, while Twitter prevented users from sharing the original link, including one of the paper's editors. Twitter also temporarily locked the White House press secretary's personal account and Trump's re-election campaign account for sharing the story. Twitter's CEO Jack Dorsey later said the company's move was unacceptable. In a post on Twitter late Wednesday, Trump called for repealing Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It allows social media platforms to block or screen content in good faith if they consider it obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. But in recent years, there has been increasing concern that it gives tech companies too much protection. In September, Attorney General William Barr said under this shield, quote, platforms can abuse this power by censoring lawful speech and promoting certain ideas over others. The tech industry has been resisting efforts to revamp or repeal the law, saying that the DOJ proposals could limit free speech. Trump has repeatedly called for repealing the legislation. Lawmakers are working on several proposals to revise it.
And some updates in the economy. President Trump says he's willing to raise his offer of $1.8 trillion for the relief package with the Democrats. He told Fox Business that he's directed Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin to put forward a bigger offer with additional money to help U.S. workers. Sounds like Groundhog Day, right? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi recently rejected the White House's offer. She says she's sticking with her $2.2 trillion deal. Pelosi and Mnuchin were expected to speak again Thursday, but no update as of yet, with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell saying a higher amount was under discussion. But he says most Senate Republicans favor a smaller bill worth about $500 billion. We're a long way away from that. And Wall Street closed lower for a third day in a row on Thursday. S&P 500 is now about 3% lower from its September 2nd record high. The Dow fell nearly 20 points or 0.07%. The S&P 500 edged down over 5 points or 0.15%. The Nasdaq dropped almost 55 points or 0.47%. And the CBOE Volatility Index, aka the Investors' Fear Gauge, hit a one-week high. Banks continue to report earnings today. Those focused on trading booked big gains, but retail banks did take a hit because of results from the pandemic, of course. S&P 500 Financials Index climbed 0.8% on the news, and Healthcare Index was the worst sector performer, down 0.7%. Morgan Stanley shares were up. Its earnings reports beat estimates today, with its profit up 25% on the same time last year, up to $2.72 billion. That's $1.66 per share, exceeding the $1.28 estimate from analysts. The biggest outperformance was in the bank's trading operations, where it booked a $400 million more than estimates gain. That, of course, follows Goldman Sachs earlier in the week. Goldman just slightly stronger then. And the weekly jobless claims are out, and not great news. Nearly 900,000 more Americans filed for unemployment last week. It's up over 50,000 from the week before. Economic activity rebounded in the third quarter, but the high jobless claims suggest the labor market recovery slowed down going into the fourth quarter. Third quarter GDP growth estimates are at a massive 32%, but projections for the fourth quarter have been cut to as low as 2.5%. The jobless claims are much lower now than they were at their peak in March, but still way above levels during the Great Recession back in 2007-2008. And some news that may surprise you, but maybe not given all the jobless claims. Americans are creating a huge number of new businesses. In fact, in the third quarter, it was 82% higher than a year ago. Could mean more jobs in the next several months, hopefully.
Business creations have skyrocketed in the third quarter at 1.6 million. That's 77% up from the previous quarter and 82% up from the same period last year. University of Maryland economics professor John Hallitwanger studies these applications and hailed the numbers as the highest on record. High-propensity employer business applications, that's businesses likely to employ, rose 79% from the previous quarter, and business applications with planned employees rose 70%. Nearly half the total of new businesses in the quarter, 46%, will likely create jobs. That's 716,000 companies. That's adding businesses likely to employ to the ones that set out to employ from the beginning. Of these types of businesses, 44% came from the South. These businesses will likely employ, but there will be a lag from the time of company creation to employing. That's likely to be several months. Goldman Sachs, who were tracking this data last month, said it suggests a more positive outlook for new business formation than after the last recession.
And the European Union is considering its own digital currency. Recently released an assessment report and said that one thing that's pushed them to do it is to prevent what it calls a foreign digital currency from being adopted in Europe. Perhaps they mean something like Bitcoin, or maybe something like China's digital yuan, which will probably be the world's first digital currency. Digital currencies are different from the internet banking and credit cards that we use today. With digital currency, all transactions will be recorded on one single central ledger, on the blockchain. That means the issuer, in this case the central bank, will know every transaction you make. One tweet called the EU's plan the final nail in the coffin of European banks. I talked to Daniel Akaya about it. He wrote "Escape from the Central Bank Trap." He told me that a digital currency will inevitably drive interest rates lower and make it impossible for banks to make a profit. I asked him why.
Basically, what the European Central Bank wants to do is to implement a digital currency that is going to allow the ECB and each member nation's central banks to control payments from and income from people more aggressively. And I think that also what it does is basically what it is telling you is that what the central bank wants to do is to increase what is already an almost unstoppable increase in money supply. implementing a digital currency in itself would add to the money supply that has already risen dramatically in the last few years. So it does not just, let's say, be an alternative. It is not an alternative. It is something that adds on top of the already existing very aggressive increase in money supply, quantitative easing, and negative rates.
And of course, we have lots of proponents and advocates for currencies like Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, but I see more opposition to central bank digital currencies. Why is that?
Well, the idea of a central bank created cryptocurrency in itself is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms, because the reason why investors and why savers want a digital currency, want a cryptocurrency, is because they want to escape the risk of central banks controlling money supply and increasing money supply. So what central banks fear is losing the monopoly of money creation, and that's why they want to use two tools. The first one is repression via, for example, legal means, or prohibiting, forbidding in different countries the use of cryptocurrencies. The second one is to create a cryptocurrency themselves that would allow them to increase money supply much faster than what is already happening, which would be absolutely phenomenal compared to what we have seen in previous years.
Very interesting. Daniel, appreciate it as always. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And the State Department is giving a warning to global banks that if they do business with a list of banned Chinese officials, they could face tough sanctions. In a report to Congress, the State Department named 10 people, including Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam. The United States put sanctions on them in August for eroding freedom in Hong Kong. Now, the department says in 60 days it will name the financial institutions that are doing substantial business with them. The report warned the firms that they could face penalties, including restrictions on U.S. loans, foreign exchange, and property transactions. Their executives could also face restrictions. The report is required by the Hong Kong Autonomy Act that President Trump signed in July. And the Trump administration is also taking steps to preserve American leadership in science and technology. It says it won't turn a blind eye to technology theft and forced technology transfer by countries like China and Russia. The new plan is called the National Strategy for Critical and Emerging Technologies. It has two pillars. One is to promote the national security innovation base, and two is to protect technology advantage. A little abstract for me, so I asked the expert. Is Rob Atkinson, president of the Information Technology Innovation Foundation. Asked him what type of regulations might the new strategy remove.
The Trump administration has made regulatory reform, if you will, a centerpiece of their agenda. There have been many examples of that. For example, they issued an executive order last year to streamline the development of agricultural biotechnologies. Before that, it was much harder to put these new technologies into farms. For example, the Federal Aviation Administration just streamlined rules around deploying commercial drones, for delivering products and things like that. The Federal Railroad Administration overturned, and rightly so, an Obama rule that required 2 crewmen in trains, and with automated systems and what's called positive train control. You only need one oftentimes. They've put in a rule to allow remote health care during the pandemic. So it's those sorts of things that would just make it easier for innovation to get into the marketplace.
So obviously these are, we'll call them internal challenges, and the framework also talks about external challenges. It mentions countries like Russia and China. Where do you think the biggest challenge to maintaining the American leadership in this space comes from?
Well, it definitely comes from China, and in particular it comes from what we have termed Chinese innovation mercantilism. In other words, using a set of unfair practices, both domestic and trade, to really, frankly, just cheat and to gain advantage and to take away market share from American companies and American workers. And the 2 biggest ways they do that are intellectual property theft. So they're The FBI has over 1,000 cases under consideration of Chinese spies, trying to steal our core technology from American companies, from American universities, and even from, frankly, federal laboratories. That's one. The second thing they do is they just shovel cash at these companies. For example, in semiconductors, the technology that's in all of our computers and our phones, the Chinese have basically written checks or allocated over $50 billion from the government just to subsidize their companies, which aren't very good. But when you have $50 billion behind you, you can actually go pretty far. And that's just completely unfair. It violates the World Trade Organization rules. And that's really what the administration is getting at when they're talking about external challenges to American innovation leadership.
And this plan, it seems like quite comprehensive government-led plan, and of course oftentimes innovation and government, we don't usually put them together, but in this case, does government have a role to play, do you feel?
Absolutely. And I think in one way this plan is very it's very telling, because in the Republican Party even 5 years ago, they wouldn't be talking about competitiveness. They wouldn't be talking about a role for the government to invest more in research and development and make sure that we have a skilled workforce and the like. The Republican Party was a lot more on the basis of just free markets and let the market deal with it. And there's been a real shift, both in the administration, with the Trump administration, and then also with Republicans in Congress. So to me, this is a somewhat of a bellwether. It really signals something that Republicans now take competitiveness in China very seriously, and they recognize that while the private sector has to lead, the government does need to play an important partnership role.
Interesting view on it. I know in this particular framework as well, it does encourage public and private partnerships as well. So Rob, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Enjoyed it.
And still to come this evening, a special underground food court is reopening in New York City. The shop owners say they're excited to make a comeback. They're also getting some assistance from their landlord. And lockdowns are still increasing in the United Kingdom. Hospitality industry is really feeling it. A major pub chain there says it has no choice but to axe jobs. That and more after the break. Welcome back. The Turnstyle underground market in New York City is back in business for the first time in 7 months. He's getting help from his landlord, the Metropolitan Transport Authority, or MTA. Most of the businesses down there are mom and pop shops. They've been devastated, obviously, but they're planning to make a comeback. NTD's Phil Zoe reports.
Macarons, pasta, donuts, wine, and even haircuts. That's what you'll find at the Turnstyle Underground Market at the Columbus Circle subway station. It's been closed for over half a year, but now it's reopening. There's about 40 eateries, stores, and kiosks. But the mom and pop shops tell NTD News it's been tough since the lockdowns.
I mean, it's been hard,
It's heartbreaking, you know what I mean?
You literally seen a drop of over like 90%.
It's been a difficult few months.
To help its tenants, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority is switching from a fixed rent model to a percentage rent model.
So that our interests are aligned. If they succeed, we just get a percentage of their revenue. And we would put that in effect for the duration of the pandemic.
The financial aid applies to small businesses only. Large brands with national chains won't qualify. Even with tourism and ridership down, owners are remaining optimistic.
How you doing?
We will stay strong, definitely.
Hopeful that we're able to pull that off together.
Be optimistic, and you have to be a fighter. You have to know that there's always going to be bumps in the roads, and we've been there before in New York, and Lord knows that we come back stronger.
Some owners are happy to be back.
Especially for the holiday season coming up, so we're definitely excited.
We are all from different countries, but we're all here for the same reason, and is to have a great life in a great city.
The Turnstyle Underground Market says they expect to be at 70% store occupancy by next month. Some shops are opening today, others are opening within the month. Most business owners are hopeful to start welcoming back New Yorkers and visitors alike. Phil Zhou, NTD News, New York.
And according to a new report, rent prices in Portland, Oregon are falling at a faster rate than most major cities. It's worse than the state average and the national average.
According to the most recent report from Apartment List, rent prices in Portland, Oregon are failing faster than many major cities. Rents were down nearly 6% in September, compared to the same time last year. The rent drop is much higher than the state average. It's down 1.5%, and the national average is down 1.4%. The city has been experiencing 7 straight months of rent decreases since February. Only 9 other major cities have steeper rent drops, including San Francisco and New York City. Some cities have actually gone up in rent, including Phoenix and Las Vegas. The Oregonian says Portland's rental market has been largely affected by the pandemic. The downtown area has been consumed with protests, which often turn destructive, along with many homeless base camps. But it's not clear from the report if rents in downtown Portland are dropping faster than the rest of the city. Apartment List says it doesn't distinguish rental prices between different neighborhoods, but the biggest drops are in urban areas across the country.
And we've been covering the new lockdown measures in the United Kingdom, and especially how it's hit the hospitality industry. Today, a major pub chain there says it has no choice but to start cutting jobs.
UK pub chain Marston'S says it plans to cut over 2,000 jobs because of the new virus restrictions. That's 16% of the workforce. It says sales are down 34% compared to the same period last year. Marston'S CEO Ralph Finlay said the additional restrictions which have been applied across the UK most recently present significant challenges to us and will make business more difficult for a period of time. Recent lockdown measures like the 10 p.m. curfew for the entertainment industry have hit pubs hard, and pubs and bars in the highest lockdown level have to close unless they serve meals. The government's wage subsidy program expires at the end of the month. A new job support program will replace it in November. Under the new program, the government will pay 22% of an employee's wage and the company will pay 55%. Employees will have to work at least 1/3 of their typical hours to take part in the program to get paid for the hours that they don't work. But UK hospitality chief Kate Nichols said the industry can't afford to pay 55% with no revenues because they're all facing restrictions. More hospitality businesses are expected to follow in Marston's footsteps, laying off workers. Findlay said Marston's is looking into ways to reduce costs. It expects to complete its review in December.
And still to come this evening, we check out the booming food delivery industry in South Korea. Companies there are struggling to find enough drivers. Find out more after the break. Welcome back. Over in South Korea, some of the world's biggest food delivery firms are scrambling to fill new orders, an estimated $4 billion worth. They're hiring thousands of new delivery workers. Here's one of their stories.
Cruising through the streets of Songnam, South Korea on her motorbike, 37-year-old Chae Young-ah works one of the country's most promising coronavirus-era jobs as a food delivery driver. With the health crisis keeping millions at home, orders have shot up by some 40% this year in South Korea. It's the third largest food delivery market in the world, and the demand for drivers has never been higher. Chae was an art teacher by day, but struggled to make ends meet after the health crisis forced her to shut down her classes. So she's traded in her paintbrush for a helmet, joining thousands of new drivers taking advantage of the delivery market boom.
I was under pressure to find something new. Some people are struggling while others are expanding their businesses. Fried chicken shops, for example, are booming. I feel lucky I found this field at a time when deliveries are booming.
Chae says she already earns 9 times the average pay she took home as a part-time art instructor, and companies are now offering bonuses to secure faster drivers willing to work rain or shine. But the competition for jobs in food delivery is likely to remain fierce. Many South Koreans have been seen lining up at job fairs as the country's unemployment rate surged to its highest in more than a decade in May. But Che says she will keep up her passion for art as a hobby rather than her profession, choosing the motorbike helmet over her pencils for the foreseeable future.
That's the latest business updates for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.